The snow didn't just cover Elias Ward. It tried to erase him. A $20,000 bounty on his head, and a brother-in-arms betrayal pinning him 2 meters deep in a frozen grave, where no one was supposed to hear his fading heartbeat. But the mountain has a way of screaming through the silence, and when Officer Emma Cole's K9, Hunter, tore his paws bloody against the ice to find a dying seal, the rescue was only the beginning of a heartbreak that would shatter everything they knew about loyalty. If this story of sacrifice moves you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the very end. Tell me in the comments which city you are watching from, so I can see how far our story of honor has traveled. The rope didn't just snap. It was sliced. A clean, professional cut that sent Elias Ward spiraling 200 feet into the throat of a jagged Montana canyon. Team 1, this is Ward. Radio check. Anyone? Elias gasped, his voice swallowed by the roar of the blizzard as he plummeted. The silence on the other end wasn't a malfunction. It was a death sentence from a mole he had trusted with his life. He hit the shelf of rock with a bone-shattering thud, the air driven from his lungs in a red mist of agony. Before the darkness claimed him, a shadow in winter camouflage stepped over his broken body, a fist like iron crashing into his temple to ensure he wouldn't fight back. When Elias finally blinked, the world was no longer gray. It was black, heavy, and suffocatingly cold. I'm buried. He wheezed, the realization hitting him harder than the fall. Snow was packed against his chest, his shoulders, locking his arms behind his back in a frozen straitjacket of coarse rope. Stay calm, Elias. Calculate. Oxygen is a luxury now, he muttered to himself, his breath hitching as he felt the sheer weight of the mountain pressing down on his ribs. A jagged black letter fluttered on a tree trunk, just inches from his fading vision, pinned there by a military dagger. Tell us what your team is planning or let the storm decide for you. Come and get it, you cowards, Elias growled, but his voice was a pathetic rasp that didn't even reach the surface of the ice. 5 miles away, the wind howled through the pines like a predatory animal, but Officer Emma Cole didn't flinch. She adjusted the forest green jacket over her lean frame, so her eyes tracking the way the blizzard was erasing the very trails she was sworn to protect. Hunter, heel! We aren't losing the path today, Emma shouted over the gale. But the 90-pound German shepherd didn't obey. He froze, his sable coat rippling as a guttural growl vibrated through his massive chest. What is it, boy? You smell an elk? Emma asked, her hand moving instinctively to the service pistol at her hip. Hunter didn't bark. He launched himself into the white fury, a powerful bound that left Emma scrambling to keep sight of his dark shape. Hunter! Get back here! That's a drop-off! She screamed, her lungs burning as she sprinted after him. She found him at the edge of a clearing, his paws digging frantically into a mound of snow, a high-pitched whine escaping his throat. Jesus! Hunter, stop! Emma cried. But as she reached him, she saw it, a flash of tactical winter camouflage beneath the ice. She dropped to her knees, her bare hands clawing at the frozen earth, the cold slicing through her skin like glass. There's a man in here. He's alive, she gasped, her fingers finally brushing against a frost-bitten beard and lips the color of twilight. Elias's eyes flickered open, sharp and gray even through the haze of near death. Don't go back to the trail, he wheezed, his voice so thin it barely carried to her ear. I'm Officer Emma Cole. You're safe now. "I've got you," she said, her voice shaking as she saw the note and the dagger. "Not safe. They're watching," Elias murmured, before his head lolled back into the snow. Emma looked at the tree line, the feeling of being hunted prickling the back of her neck. "Hunter." "Watch our six! We have to move him now!" she commanded. She slung the seal's heavy, limp arm over her shoulder, gritting her teeth against the agonizing weight as she began to drag him toward the only refuge left. Noah Green's cabin. "Noah, open the door! I've got a casualty!" Emma pounded on the aged wood, her strength flagging. The door swung open, and Noah, a broad-shouldered ranger with a beard the color of wheat, froze in shock. "Emma, is that a soldier? What the hell happened out there?" Noah barked, stepping forward to take the man's weight. "He was buried, Noah. Pinned like a trophy." Emma panted, stumbling into the warmth of the cabin. They laid Elias on a cot near the roaring fireplace, stripping away the wet, frozen layers of his gear. "Hunter, stay with him," Emma whispered, and the dog immediately pressed his nose to Elias's shoulder, tethering the soldier to the world of the living. Elias's eyes snapped open, a sudden violent clarity returning to him. "The cabin. It won't hold," Elias rasped, his hand clutching Emma's sleeve with terrifying strength. "Slow down, Elias, you're in shock," Noah said, trying to press a blanket over him. "Calculate, damn it! They left me alive to lead them to my team, and now I've led them to you," Elias hissed, his jaw tight with pain. Emma looked at Noah, the silence of the woods outside suddenly feeling like a held breath. "How many are coming for you?" Noah asked, his voice low and steady. "Enough to finish what they started," Elias answered, his gaze moving to the window as the first alarm Noah had strung outside began to rattle in the darkness. Elias struggled to rise, his trembling hands gripping the edge of the wooden bed frame as cold sweat soaked the wool blankets Noah had just tucked around him. "Listen, Emma, they aren't just coming for me. They're here to erase every single trace of this betrayal." He wheezed, his eyes boring into the police officer as if to instill a primal, necessary fear. Emma tightened her grip on her service pistol, her breath hitching as she looked at Noah and then at Hunter, the dog snarling fiercely toward the main door. Noah gritted his teeth, snatching up his hunting rifle. His usually gentle face, that of a man who nursed wounded eagles, vanished, replaced by the cold lethality of a guardian pushed to the brink. "We don't have 3 hours, Elias. Those bastards are already in the yard!" Noah rasped as the metallic rattle of the alarm cans rang out dryly through the night. A sudden volley of gunfire tore through the wooden wall, splinters flying everywhere. Emma frantically pushed Noah flat to the floor, while Hunter lunged to shield Elias. "Elias, can you shoot?" Emma screamed amidst the deafening cracks of the rifles, noticing blood beginning to seep from the old wound on his shoulder. Elias didn't answer with words. He snatched the rifle Noah handed him, lying prone on the bed, and adjusted his breathing to the clinical instinct of a SEAL sniper. A shadow darted past the window. Elias squeezed the trigger, a sharp pop echoed, and a pained scream was instantly swallowed by the blizzard outside. "Noah, watch the south window! Emma, don't let them flank us!" Elias ordered, his voice as hard as cold steel despite his body shivering from exhaustion. Noah had just raised his head when a sniper round grazed his leg. He collapsed against the wall, his face blanching as he clenched his jaw to keep from screaming. Hunter was struck by a splinter of wood flying off the frame, whining in alarm. but the K-9 refused to leave his post, his amber eyes burning with a fierce, protective hatred. Emma felt like her chest was about to explode. She never imagined a routine mountain patrol would turn into such a bloody battlefield. "They're carrying explosives! They intend to burn this cabin to the ground!" Elias shouted, as he spotted the faint flicker of fire at the edge of the woods. Noah, fighting the pain, crawled toward a wooden drawer and tossed a flare gun to Emma. "Shoot it, Emma. If that bird doesn't get here, we're all going to be ash in this hole." Emma's hand trembled as she aimed the flare at the sky, the crimson fire spiraling upward, a desperate thin thread of hope as shadows closed in from every side. The flare hissed into the frozen sky, a bleeding red comet that painted the snow-covered trees in a terrifying crimson light. Emma's lungs burned with the metallic tang of gunpowder as she watched the silhouettes in the woods halt for a split second, blinded by the sudden radiance. "They're rushing the porch, Noah! Give me the rifle!" Elias roared, his voice a jagged blade of command that cut through the thunder of his own racing heart. He ignored the fire in his ribs as he rolled off the cot, dragging his half-frozen body toward the shattered window. Noah groaned, his face a ghostly mask of sweat and pain as he slapped a fresh magazine into the hunter's rifle and slid it across the floorboards. Hunter let out a high-pitched, war-torn yelp, his sable fur matted with blood from the flying shrapnel, but he stood his ground like a shield between the door and the dying seal. "I can't see them, Elias! The smoke is too thick!" Emma shrieked. Her shotgun kicked back against her bruised shoulder as she fired blindly at a shadow lunging through the broken frame. A bullet whined inches from her ear, biting into the wood and showering her hair in splinters. Elias didn't blink. He exhaled a slow, frozen mist, his finger tightening on the trigger with the clinical precision of a man who had made a pact with death long ago. The first intruder reached the stairs, his face obscured by a winter mask. But Elias's shot was faster, a sharp crack that sent the man tumbling back into the white void. 3 hours is a lie. They're going to burn us out in 10 minutes, Noah shouted, his voice cracking as he saw a second flare, not theirs, ignite at the edge of the woods. The cabin groaned under a new volley of lead, the walls splintering like dry bone as the hunters turned desperate. Emma felt a sudden, sickening jolt of adrenaline as she realized the satellite radio was still on the floor, blinking its rhythmic red SOS. "Cade, if you're in the air, do it now!" she screamed toward the device, her voice lost in the cacophony of shattering glass and Hunter's fierce, guttural snarls. Suddenly, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of rotor blades began to vibrate in the floorboards, a low-frequency roar that shook the very foundation of the ridge. "Is it them? Elias? Is it Team 3? Noah gasped, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and profound hope. Elias didn't answer. He gripped his rifle tighter, his gaze fixed on a tall, muscular figure emerging from the flare smoke, the man who had held the shovel when Elias was buried. The intruder raised a grenade, his eyes reflecting the crimson fire of the sky, but the air was suddenly ripped apart by the scream of a door gunner's minigun from above. Snow and pine needles exploded into a chaotic whirlwind as the searchlights of the Black Hawk sliced through the cabin windows like the eyes of a vengeful god. "Get down! Cover Noah!" Elias shrieked, throwing his body over his rescuers just as the front door was kicked off its hinges by a pair of heavy, tactical boots. The room was flooded with white light and the deafening roar of operators shouting orders. But through the haze, Elias saw the face of Dalton Reeves, his commander, dropping from a rappel line. "Target neutralized! Ward, do you copy?" A voice boomed, but the silence that followed from the corner of the room was terrifying. Hunter was no longer barking. He was whimpering at Emma's side, nudging her limp hand as the crimson light of the flare finally began to fade into the gray of a cold, unforgiving dawn. The roar of the Black Hawk gradually faded into a heavy, agonizing silence, as the metallic scent of gunpowder mingled with the biting mountain frost creeping into the shattered room. Elias pushed himself off the blood-stained floorboards, his trembling hands white-knuckled as he gripped the bed frame, his ash-gray eyes locked onto Emma, who lay motionless beside Hunter. "Emma! Answer me, Emma!" he roared, his voice a jagged rasp of exhaustion and raw terror, while Dalton Reeves lunged through the doorway, his heavy tactical boots crunching over shards of broken glass. Hunter let out a low, mournful whimper, his body trembling as he struggled to lick Emma's ice-cold hand. His side was matted with blood from the shrapnel, yet he refused to collapse before his partner opened her eyes. Dalton grabbed Elias by the shoulder, shoving him back down with professional force. "Ward, sit tight! The medics are landing! You've leaked enough blood to fill a canteen!" Elias shoved the commander's hand away, his eyes burning with a lethal, unyielding fire. "Forget about me, save her. She's the only reason I'm not still rotting in that hole." A squad of SEAL Team 3 operators dragged a struggling man through the threshold, a captive caught trying to vanish into the tree line. Elias stared at the traitor's face, a man he had once called brother, the person who had held the shovel while the snow turned into a shroud. Why? Was the bounty worth more than a decade of sweat and blood? Elias wheezed, the heartbreak in his chest more agonizing than the lead in his side. The traitor refused to meet his gaze, shivering under the shadow of Dalton's rifle, while Noah groaned from the corner, his leg completely numb from the sniper round. Emma suddenly gasped, a ragged, wet sound as she looked up at the splintered ceiling, her pale lips barely moving. "Elias. Tell me that's a bird I hear." Elias gripped her hand, hot tears carving tracks through the ash on his face. "We won, Emma. We survived because you didn't look back." But as the first thread of hope sparked, Hunter suddenly swayed, his powerful legs buckling as he collapsed heavily against Emma's chest, his breathing turning into a shallow, stuttering rhythm. "No. Not now, Hunter. Please don't quit on me." Emma shrieked, her fingers tangling in his thick fur as she tried to pull him back from the edge. Dalton barked into his comms, demanding a priority medevac for the K-9, while the dying red glow of the flare still haunted the room like a ghost of the night's violence. The forward operating medical tent was a chaotic symphony of monitors beeping and hushed, urgent commands. But Elias Ward didn't hear any of it as he gripped Emma's hand, his eyes fixed on the bloody bandage covering her shoulder. "Stay with me, Emma. You didn't drag me out of that grave just to leave me now," Elias whispered, his voice cracking like dry timber under the weight of a decade's worth of suppressed emotion. Emma's eyes fluttered open, a weak, pained smile tugging at her pale lips as she looked past him toward the padded bed where Hunter lay, his breathing heavy and rattling. Is he still with us?" She wheezed, her fingers twitching against Elias's palm, searching for the heartbeat of the partner who had bled for her. Elias leaned over, his hand trembling as he rubbed behind Hunter's ears, feeling the dog's tail thump once, twice, a soldier's final salute to the woman who led him into the fire. "He's a fighter, Emma, just like you. He's not giving up on his officer," Elias promised, even as Carla Hughes, the medic, adjusted his IV with a grim, knowing look in her eyes. Commander Dalton Reeves stepped into the tent, his boots tracking mud and melted snow across the sterile floor, his face a hardened mask of professional fury and deep-seated regret. "Ward, we've got the mole. It was a logistics officer who sold your grid for a wire transfer," Reeves barked, his voice dropping into a low, lethal growl that made the IV bags shiver. Elias felt the cold rage ignite in his chest, a fire that burned hotter than the fever ravaging his body. Yet he didn't look away from Emma. "I don't care about the money, Dalton. I want to know why a brother-in-arms thought my life was worth a few zeros in a bank account." Elias spat, his jaw tightening until it clicked. Noah Green, leaning heavily on a crutch with his leg wrapped in thick white gauze, spoke up from the corner, his gentle voice now carrying the weight of mountain stone. "Because men like that don't see people, Elias. They only see assets and liabilities," Noah said, his blue eyes burning with a protective fire for the friend he had almost lost. The sun began to crest over the Rockies, casting a pale, fragile gold across the pines. But inside the tent, the air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and the looming shadow of a final goodbye. "Emma, the commander. He brought something for you," Elias whispered, stepping back to let Reeves approach the cot with a small velvet box. Reeves knelt beside the bed, his movements stiff and deliberate, as he opened the box to reveal 2 silver medals, one for Emma, and a smaller, gleaming badge for Hunter. "For bravery beyond the call of duty. For walking into a storm no one asked you to fight," Reeves said, his voice thick with an uncharacteristic tremor. Emma reached out, her fingers brushing the cold metal, but her gaze was on Hunter, whose amber eyes were slowly losing their luster. "He saved the seal. He saved us all, didn't he, boy?" Emma sobbed, pulling the dog's head into her lap as the medic stepped forward to check his failing vitals. The heartbeat monitor for Hunter suddenly flatlined into a long, terrifying drone that felt like it was tearing the air out of the tent. "No, Ares! Hunter, come back!" Emma shrieked, her body convulsing with grief as she held the dog's limp frame against her chest. Elias dropped to his knees, his own wounds forgotten, as he pressed his forehead against the dog's cold muzzle, a silent prayer for the soul that had led them out of the dark. But then, a miracle of breath, a jagged, stuttering inhale, broke the silence as the medic's adrenaline shot found its mark. Hunter's eyes snapped open, a low, guttural bark erupting from his throat as if he were still chasing the shadows back into the forest. "He's back. God, he's back," Noah whispered, his crutch clattering to the floor as he sank into a chair, the tension finally snapping like a dry twig. Hours later, the clearing beside the pines was filled with the quiet, respectful presence of SEALs, medics, and rangers, all standing as witnesses to a survival that defied every law of nature. Elias stood apart, leaning against a tree, his breath misting in the cold air as he watched Emma and Noah sharing a quiet moment of relief. "You're not going back to the teams. Are you, Ward?" Reeves asked, standing beside him with his arms crossed over his tactical vest. Elias looked at the trio, the cop, the ranger, and the dog, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the heating lamps. "I spent my life fighting for a flag, Dalton. I think I'd like to spend the rest of it fighting for the people who actually dragged me home, Elias said, his voice firm and certain. The mountains stood tall, their peaks glowing with the promise of a second chance, a reminder that even the deepest winter cannot freeze a heart that chooses to fight for another. In the frozen heart of the Rockies, 3 souls and a dog had proven that honor isn't a rank. It is the refusal to let a stranger die alone in the dark.